Welcome, everybody. Today, we're going to be talking about Secret Level and our choices for episode to discuss. Each of us chose one episode, and we're going to go through those choices right now and talk about them. So, Twitless, which episode of Secret Level did you choose?
My favorite episode, so the one I'll be talking about, is Mega Man Start, directed by Alex Beatty and written by Jeff Juhaz. And it's tricky doing a synopsis for this one because the synopsis would be longer than the actual episode was. Anyone who's seen or heard of Secret Level, these are mini episodes, and some of the episodes, the credit sequence is longer than the episode. So the Mega Man one is that very episode, and the discourse around that has actually talked about that. It's criminally short, but it's based in Mega City, where the robotic creations of Dr. Light have been twisted by his partner who's turned evil, Dr. Wily, who ends up making them into robot masters who are out to, take over the world, essentially. Each one of these robots have specific tasks, specific abilities that they have. And in this very brief, I'd almost call it a trailer, more than an episode, but we get to see Dr. Light with his. It's kind of almost like his son, essentially. His name is Rock. He's meant to be kind of an assistant robot, and Rock wants to go and save the world and do the right thing. And he's he's just a little bit like Pinocchio in a way. He wants to be a real boy in some respects. He's Dr. Light's most, I think, special creation in that respect. I think he's the closest to being human. And Dr. Light actually says, "No, I've got a combat robot I'm going to send out who's actually equipped. I'm going to send out Bomb Man." And then, of course, Dr. Wily's, infection comes in and corrupts Bomb Man, and Mega Man has to defeat him. Everything I've said is about half as long as the episode. So it is so freaking short, but they packed a lot into that very, very brief episode, mostly an action scene to set up something. It felt very much like a pitch for a series or a longer piece they could do. A lot of Secret Level kind of feels like that. These are kind of almost like pitches for things. What did you guys make of Mega Man?
Let's take a brief pause to hear from the awesome creators joining us today and find out what cool projects they're currently working on.
Hey guys, if you love sword and sandal historical fiction with a healthy dose of ancient Roman and Egyptian fantasy mixed in, then check out Kyrie. We've got 450 pages printed so far, a fourth book on the way. Order your books today at curiecomic.com.
Modern day, classic superhero storytelling. Get The Adventures of Omega Girl, issues 1 through 5, now on Indie Planet.
Thank you to our awesome creators, and now back to the video. So my impression of the one episode that you described was that it essentially was meant to set up a purpose for Mega Man.
Mhm.
That he had this endearing quality of wanting to help others, and that's what he was built to do. But he was apt at uh, being a defender and doing that in the combat setting. He's resilient. He didn't succumb to the infection that Dr. Evil had sent and readily, was able to turn Bomb Man. Mega Man was able to withstand all of that temptation and still fight it off and save his beloved Dr. Light.
Do you have to say it's Dr. Wily, not Dr. Evil? He's not fighting Austin.
Oh, come on.
It's not Austin Powers.
I'll be excited for a second. I enjoyed the just thinking about it from an artistic perspective. I think this is one of the better ones that goes for that. There's kind of like a soft Pixar-y kind of realism. That's a sort of that's a mode that Blur Studios has learned to do well. They've got several artistic avenues they explore here. That's their one for this. It's the appropriate pick, I would say, for Mega Man.
You don't think it was too much Nintendo hire this man, doing the, taking Mario and, using Unreal to be overly realistic and not fitting the video game world?
No, yeah, well, I mean, because my pick is Spelunky, and I actually kinda like that approach a bit more. I I
Mhm.
I actually think it's nice when you, uh I think it's been kind of refreshing when people don't take that tactic and they intentionally kinda put some texture. Like, literally, they might do the texture maps are not meant to convey it doesn't look like real human skin on a cartoon's face. Instead, it just kinda looks like somebody somehow, like, drew it or, like we've seen with, the Arcane
Mhm.
Netflix show or,
Right.
oh, what's the video game that did the, anyway, we've seen it in gaming too, where people will, kinda make it feel a little hand touched. I think for Mega Man, I feel like that's alright to go bright and, fresh and really turn up the chroma a lot. There were some little detail I mean, just to get it slightly nerdy, are you okay if I go slightly nerdy?
Go nerd.
Please do.
Let your nerd flag fly.
Is this the appropriate place for nerds?
Yes.
Um, that sometimes you can get away with if you have a really good, model that's really well rigged, you don't have to animate as much because the passive like, the face has just been modeled really well where you just like, its resting pose face already feels emotive. And
Mhm.
I got that impression with this. It's entirely fine and efficient to do these sort of short stories, and any animators listening know that your animation's never done. It's just has to be turned in. So if you could shortcut it by just having a face that just like Mega Man kind of had the same face the whole time because the model was built that way. That's a good shortcut. And when you're dealing with this much, the render time of trying to get something that looks this developed, this like cinema level done
Mhm.
as rapidly as my impression as this was put together. I mean, something has to give in terms of time, and so that would be I don't know if that's a criticism, more of an observation, but I mean, you can't throw your animators at a project and have them hand do everything. Something has to be shortcutted, and I think I'd say kind of the character animation was shortcutted a little bit at the expense, just relying a bit on what was modeled instead, which is again perfectly fine. I think, and I say that because some of the other stuff that we're going to talk about tonight, particularly Pac-Man, I think they leaned a little more on some really good character animation. So
I think they definitely leaned into some Battle Alita, for Mega Man. He
yeah,
looks
that's a good
very,
comparison.
Alita, I think, Battle Angel a bit. Um, for only being, like, just a few minutes long, they did cram in some nice little, Mega Man elements and well read you've played Mega Man, right? So I know you picked up on the whole like Mega Man has to use the particular weakness to defeat the particular robot master. Like the whole those Mega Man
Correct.
games were all about you have to use Fireman's power against Iceman, you have to use Cutman's power against Grassman, and kind of doing this whole like rock paper scissors throughout it all. And they actually in how he defeats the robot they very they worked that in, so even though there's very little content in this, they actually did quite a lot of you've played the games, you're going to pick up on what we're doing here.
What I enjoyed about it also is that it's a nice reimagining of the Mega Man world. It doesn't steal from it directly. It doesn't look like the video game animated. It did try to put a mature aesthetic onto everything, but one that I enjoyed, very
Mm,
much in the vein of Mario, where it doesn't look directly like the video game, but it looks like the cinematic version of the video game. So if
Mhm.
there were a long running feature featuring this Mega Man and this representation of the robots, I would be quite happy with that, and would definitely plunk down some money to go see that.
And I think that was the discourse when they were complaining about it being short. I think they were complaining because they wanted more. They weren't
Mhm.
complaining just because, oh my gosh, it was short and it was terrible. They were saying just when it was getting good, and I was like, yeah, they were like, it was over.
Yeah,
Like, which it is so freaking short. Is it like I don't? Is it like is it 3 minutes or something? It's so
it was like I want to say 7 to 8. It had a bit longer of a runtime than 3 minutes, but yeah, it felt very abruptly short. It introduced the character. It introduced his motivation. It defeated the bad guy, and he was off to the races. So
I I, I know that Mega Man 1 is shorter than 8 minutes, but it's anyway,
I
regardless.
I think that's part of the issue of telling the story straight rather than alluding to the story and then taking some sort of meta higher level appreciative kind of perspective on the IP, which is what a lot of these other ones did. That you have to do a lot, and it's not going to feel like you're it's never going to feel like you're doing enough with this kind of compressed time frame. It really highlights how, I mean, short stories. I don't know how you guys feel about short stories. They're my favorite because they're so freaking hard to do. There has to be no meat. There's no fat on the
No, yeah,
bones.
no feet on the
Just
bone. Yeah,
pure
yeah.
meat on those bones, and it's so cool to see when they're done well. Even top studios rarely do them well, and Blur Studios is really good at doing. They're probably the premier animation studio for doing whether it's for games or they did something for Sonic 2. Um,
Mhm. Well,
they've done a lot
th-
in very like a couple minutes. They can tell full stories.
this one was done by Illusorium. It's a Spanish a studio from
Oh, was
Spain.
it? Oh, it's not
Mhm.
all Blur? Okay.
No, no,
Once
Blur did some
again,
of.
I'm
They
wrong.
actually had different studios for this one. Yeah, this one was done by
Oh, man.
a studio from Spain. But no, but you're definitely correct in the fact that it's doing so much in such a little time, and so that people were really chomping at the bit. I think that is it definitely to its credit. But I think we want to talk about uh, Matt's choice
yeah, Matt,
for
tell
yeah.
us your choice for secret
Yeah,
level.
I enjoyed, Spelunky. So, that was kind of more, I've already kinda spoken a bit about the artistic style, which I think is part of this, overall refreshing trend of trying to marry, um, kinda like a photoshoppy, concept arty sort of feel. Uh, possibly, Star Wars Clone Wars probably made it famous about 15 years ago. Its earliest manifestation was probably that popularized it at least, and it's been slowly gaining steam as an alternative way to kind of depict things, which I think people have learned to really appreciate. It's almost like it's it's cousins with like pixel art, like retro games or that sort of thing, where you're not just you're trying to do you're thinking of animation as in light of what contextualizes it for the person watching, whether they like illustrations of cool characters, and it really just has two characters: the Anna Spelunky character, and then there's that mentor character, apparently named Liz Mutton. Thank you, IMDb. But but it's really not about, in a way, it's about the game, but it's about games in general, which I appreciate. It's not a cynical, subversive take on games, but it was actually kind of aspirational view on what it means to to play games, to play video games, and to try and fail. And actually, a lot of these shorts deal with that theme, but Spelunky had a very kind of positive, clearly positive take on it, where you're not trying and failing, dying, but you're adding you're adding bricks to the wall in your own story and development as a gamer, which is a really fun way to think of it. And artistically, I think it did some really fun stuff. I think it obviously it's part of this growing trend that slowly kind of has been gaining momentum. We saw it with Arcane in like 2022 with Netflix's show. I think Star Wars Clone Wars was the first time I think it was really tried robustly on a popular level, where you kind of do this sort of like photoshoppy, painterly texture map approach to lower resolution models, and you kind of make it feel, you don't try to make it feel real, you just try to make it feel painterly and appealing at the same time as being, 3D animated, and I appreciated seeing that, and also, this was probably the one that was playing with, like, a retro kinda 80s soundtrack sorta thing. Uh, it wasn't just, like, dark, like, Murder in the Club synthwave or something like we've been used to.
The
Such as the
bodies hit the floor.
Yeah.
the
Yeah,
vapor
it was like a
wave.
fun it was
Yeah.
like family friendly synthwave. It was a cute. I think that's a fair thing to say, is a cute aspirational take on this game, which I'd never heard of, and, but also gaming in general and what it means to be a gamer. I think it was just overall very fun, positive perspective.
Yeah, I enjoyed that aspect as well, where, as you mentioned, Matt, that it gave some context to the experience of gaming. You're accumulating lived experiences, and it gave a lot of emotional weight to the idea of having multiple lives and trying again and again. I almost thought this was Demon Souls, the movie, so because that one is infamous for all the deaths that you experience as you're progressing through the game. But it's not fair to think of it in terms of deaths. It's fair to
Oh,
think of it
Dark
in terms
Dark
of lives.
Souls? This is the
Demon
one
Souls, the
time I
Dark
can
Souls,
ever
yeah.
correct anybody else on this for
It was
misnaming.
originally Demon Souls. It came out on
Oh, okay.
PlayStation, and they had to change the
Mhm.
well, they didn't have to, but they changed the name to Dark Souls, and that's
Messed it up.
what it's known as. But
Okay.
yeah, I always
Right.
think of it as Demon Souls because that's the one I played the most because I
Right.
enjoyed that initial experience. And yeah, it is the life of a gamer where death is part of the experience, but you don't think of gaming and in terms of the deaths, you think of it in terms of the lives that you had during that game, and that gave you each life gave you that unique experience as you were progressing through it. So, Spelunky represents that very well. It's a game that changes environments. It's unique and new every single time you go through it. You expect to die, but what you're really doing is you expect to live in the moment as you go through that new representation of the game each time you hit restart and continue.
So I have an unhealthy amount of time spent in both Spelunky 1 and Spelunky 2. I was just checking at some of my stats for the game, and I have 2,000 deaths, over 2,000, almost 3,000, almost 3,000
2,000
deaths.
lives is what you
Yes,
mean to
sir.
say.
Right. I have like 2,000. No, you're right. 2,000 deaths, over 2,000 deaths in Spelunky 1, and only 700 deaths in Spelunky 2. So I've definitely played this game
It
a lot.
tells you? Is that
Oh yeah,
sorry,
oh
is
yeah.
that part of that is so that is a game mechanic
It is a
to back that
yeah.
up. Oh,
You're kind
neat.
of you're meant to be kind of proud of the amount of times you have you've tallied that up. So
Oh, wow.
in the episode, they're like, oh, she's got like a couple of hundred. It's like newbie. um, but I have played this game a lot, and it's a roguelike. So whenever you die, you go straight to the beginning, and it's a procedurally generated. So um, the walls are shifting, and every time you get into the game, it's moved everything. Like the levels are all different, the tiles have all moved, so you get a completely new experience every single time that you play. And they channeled that pretty well for the episode with it. There's kind of this mystical tunnel that she's going in and doing it. And they didn't do the, I guess, the original plot of the game. In the game, Anna's looking for her father, and I guess they just wanted to do something different with it. Because if she were looking for her father, I don't think she would also just be like, "Oh, I'm just going to do another run." It would change the dynamics. It would make it a little more imperative. And this one wanted to just kind of celebrate, as you mentioned, Matt. It wanted to not just celebrate Spelunky; it wanted to celebrate gaming, and so they kind of just made it about her and Liz, um, and just kind of about the experience of just over and over again trying and trying again, and almost losing the will to go on, but then discovering that every one of your failures is actually a lived experience. And there are Spelunky channels that have compiled that and follow that philosophy. There's a very pretty famous runner who unfortunately took his own life, I think, called Twiggle, and he used to do compilations of just he's called I think it was called, was it Spelunked, and you would just watch him just humorously die over and
Oh,
over
wow.
and over again, and it was just it was a celebration of gaming. And so this episode does a good job of capturing that. And it also uses some of the soundtrack from the game as well, which is also nice. So if you've played the game, you'll pick up on those little bits there. Um, was it too was it too saccharine though, or did it land the tone right for you guys?
I felt it landed the tone well, given that it's referencing a 2D platformer with
Yeah.
very limited character development. As you mentioned, it's meant to give a narrative about the experience of gaming, and when you spend a lot of time on a game that you got off of Steam, and you're hoping to relax and kick back and just enjoy the experience, having the experience put into some kind of frame of context for you of what you are doing collectively with other gamers as you all play this game was very nice to give some metaphor and meaning to the idea of what it is to be a gamer.
I will say the only thing I was missing, I do like the original Spelunky man. Um, and so, I would have liked to have seen him. He's kind of like he really is the center. He's the Indiana Jones stand-in for the series. So it would have been nice
Mm,
to have seen him. But I guess the angle they took was fine.
mm. Yeah, I thought it was I mean, it's promising to go a very particular direction that it's confident about, and I think it delivered on what it promised to give. So it's hard for me to. It would be hard for any of us, I think, to say it's wrong because the I would have done it in a different direction, particularly because we have so many other shorts of very different persuasion, very different mood and a climate, like I think what Well-Red's favorite is. Well-Red,
You're
what?
not supposed to know. Shh, it's a secret.
Oh
Yeah.
gosh, this one caused this one caused a stir in
Mm,
internet discourse. So, well, Red, which one are you talking about?
So my choice was Pac-Man, and I actually think I have the best choice, quite frankly. So
mm,
the story here is that there's a mysterious alien that ends up on a savage world, populated with a lot of horrendous monsters that he must fight and survive by executing them and then consuming them. And his only guide throughout this entire experience is a small little yellow orb that tells him eat or die, survival of the fittest, right? Law of the jungle here. And this strange alien, he finds a sword. He certainly learns how to eat. He learns how to hunt, and he uh, hunts hunts to his heart's delight. And once he's ravenous, and once he is consuming everything in sight, this mysterious orb takes him to this location in this very savage land where he fights a very indomitable creature that holds the key to entering a particular gateway that would allow them to escape this world. The alien is unfortunately quickly felled by this monstrous entity, and the orb turns on him, possessing him, forcing him to progress forward, consuming the monster, and ultimately realizing that the orb was manipulating him the entire time, relinquishing the control that it has over him, freeing himself, dying ultimately, and leaving the orb trapped in this mysterious world. The orb, of course, is Pac Man. The reason why I enjoyed this story so much is it had the least to work with and did the absolute most with it. So,
mm.
So I have to
You're right.
disagree with you a little bit there in the sense that if you're going with maybe the original arcade cabinet with Pac-Man, there's not much to work with, but Pac-Man actually has some established, like you have Pac-Man World, like there's been some there's cartoon series, there's been some children's shows. There's actually stuff you could do with it. If you're going straight, like I said, going straight off the arcade cabinet, completely agree. It's one of the most, it's only slightly more complex than what Pong, you know what I mean? Like it's Space
mhm,
Invaders. There's not
right.
Space Invaders has more of a plot if you think about it. It's just actually like aliens
Creatures and yeah.
from space. So I just I didn't particularly like this one very much. I felt like it did the sort of edgy, we're gonna take this thing and do like a student art film project with it. But I I I don't know. It's a tricky one, and I know the discourse on this one has been, I think, a little divided. I think there have been a lot of people who are like, "What the hell does this have to do with Pac-Man?" And then there have been at least, I think, a few other people who've said this is, artistic genius because of all the innovative things they're doing. I think this one is going to be definitely a conversation starter. So I definitely need to hear more. Why are you falling on that side of that discourse? What makes this brilliant, and why is it okay to connect this to Pac-Man? Because like at the end of the day, it has something to do with Pac-Man, right? In order for it to be a Pac-Man episode.
It planted all the appropriate seeds. So when it started, at first, I was dissatisfied with the episode. I thought, oh, is this alien supposed to be Pac-Man? And it's because he's got the little beady eyes and,
Mhm.
funny, smooth, smooth features and mouth. So
Mhm.
I wasn't happy with that. But then there were suggestions and references that strongly put the frame of reference in Pac-Man, the eat and be eaten, but then also trapped in the maze. You must run through the maze. The idea of being able to escape, the idea of being trapped in the maze and having to progress through it, and the idea of Pac-Man ultimately being the entity that is confined to that environment, and only the humans get to leave, which I thought was very, very connecting to the experience of being a gamer. Having that be represented by a symbol on the door, Pac-Man having to actually break the third wall. And if you think about it, he has to enter the player because only the player actually ever gets to leave the game. Only the human gets to step away from the joystick, from the screen, and go up about their lives. Pac Man is always trapped in this environment of eat and be eaten. And so in this story, Pac-Man's breaking the third wall. He's taking over what represents the human player, manipulating him to allow him to pass through this gateway of escape from this game world. So Pac-Man is a quite malevolent figure in the game. It's a very interesting take, but it's also very in keeping with the constrained, robotic, repetitive nature of the franchise, of the gameplay mechanic, and of the character that you're controlling. And so I felt like all of the right as- aesthetic pieces, I want to say, but also the representations of what Pac-Man is were correctly embodied in all of the storytelling elements that they utilized to form this narrative. It was very clever, I thought, that they were able to execute that.
It is clever. I'm just not sold on it. It's
Mm.
I have to completely admit they did clever things. There's still a part of me that's like, I don't know how I feel
Just too
about that.
clever, I guess, is that the impression you got?
I don't know. What do you think, Matt?
I was furiously trying to find the studio that put this together because I thought that the animation was
It's the
next
same.
level.
It's the same one that did the Mega Man one. It's the Illusorium.
Really? Okay.
Mhm.
Great job for them. Shows a lot of range. I think that when you have a game that's this much of a legacy game and it's thin in terms of story, that I think you have more permission if you do it from the perspective of appreciating what the game was. I think you can go in all kinds of directions, and if an audience, particularly audience that knows the game that you're lifting this from, can sense that you care about it, I think they'll give you a lot of latitude. And I mean, it sounds funny saying that about Pac-Man,
So
but
my
yeah.
challenge to that is this.
Hmm.
Mega Man felt completely in the spirit, right? If you
Yeah,
liked Mega
sure,
Man, and Mega Man's very much like an Astro Boy stand-in. He really is. It's even the
definitely.
creators have admitted to this. He's just a, and it's cool where how Mega Man has become his own thing. But the kids who enjoyed Mega Man, I think watching the Mega Man episode and showing it to their kids, I think there's going to be no issues with that, and I think it'd be something that's exciting even. Um, Spelunky, same thing. Spelunky is a game that I think has a pretty family friendly register, and I think showing that to them, no problems, issues at all. Pac-Man is a horse. They did the horror route. They did the whole, hey, we're gonna take Mickey Mouse, we're gonna turn him into a slasher, uh, and in this case, he's like a interdimensional demon. You can't show that to your kids. I don't think they did the horror thing, and I just that does leave a it leaves a bitter taste in my mouth. If you played Pac-Man World, if you played the childhood games with Waka 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 and him just being the adventureman who's kind of like Mario, it's like watching horror Mario, and and I know that's just there's a trend doing that. They've done it with they did it with Sonic.exe. There's a whole trend of taking the video game mascot characters and turning them into horrible demon monsters, and
Yeah.
that's I guess fine for like internet fan creation, but to do it in an official channel and be like, we took Pac-Man and made him into a horror monster. It's clever, and I'm not going to say it's not clever. They've done very interesting things with it. I feel icky about it.
I don't know that it's fair to simplify it down to just that they made a horror out of it. But such an old, established franchise, you're allowed to take liberties. They make horror movies out of Winnie the Pooh right now. But what they really did here, even though it was presented in the context of horror, is somebody came into the offices with the assignment of you need to give Pac-Man a pathos.
Yep.
And how exactly do you do that with a two-dimensional moving circle
Mhm.
that just crosses a small maze, eating dots, and runs away from ghosts periodically? They gave him the motivation of wanting his freedom, the most fundamental
Yeah.
urge that any living being could possibly understand when they're confined and trapped in this restrictive setting that Pac-Man is. To be able to perceive that Pac-Man is an entity that is trapped in the setting that he's currently in, and that uh, uh, he must see his freedom be represented by the people that are operating him, that are engaging with this experience, the player, that becomes his vehicle to ultimately attaining this singular motivation that they gave him. I thought that was actually very perceptive to be able to go and stand in front of the game and to step outside of yourself and think about that experience and dynamic to be able to come up with this narrative.
It's in
And
again.
well,
I'll grant you, it's interesting. It's still icky to do it with a kid's property,
yeah,
and those are that's the
you're not
conflict I've got with it.
you're not wrong. There's a risk there. I think if they had taken the Mega Man approach, it would have been you would have to read into it just as much, which is interesting. You know?
I mean, in the other Pac-Man media, they give him a family. You got Miss Pac-Man. There's like he's got a
Yeah.
dog. They give him a cast. I'm not saying that it's like it's Shakespeare, but there is stuff there. There's just as much I think in Pac-Man as there is in some of the other video game franchises that have character like Sonic. You know what I mean? It's like there's stuff that's there you can use. I don't want to dismiss that. Uh,
The common thread in all of these secret level episodes that we're discussing is that they gave motivation and emotional depth to something very innate in the pure experience, in the immediate experience of playing the game. If you're dying repetitively and coming back to life, what would that mean and signify to you if you were an entity living that experience? The motivations of Mega Man, that he was born to do the missions that he does in the video games, and that was his true purpose of existing. Or Pac-Man yearning for his freedom through the window of the player that's controlling him during each of those game playthroughs. So these are all innate experiences. To just introduce superfluous, attributes or aesthetics and just say, oh, now they'll have kids, and then they get married and then they get a job and a house. That's taking them outside of what I think the directors here are trying to achieve of how do you embody some kind of meaning and significance in the idea of what it is to be a video game player, and how do you communicate that in a strong narrative on screen.
the one thing I don't want to read too deeply into it because it's like the Mega Man one is pretty much is pretty. I don't think the Mega Man one I see your thread, and I think the thread does play from an interpretive angle, but the episode also plays as a pretty straightforward just pitch for an adventure series, right? And so plays it pretty straight, but it does tie into something. I'm glad you brought it up, which is, um, or I'm glad you've allowed me to. You've set up a really great segue, which is the idea that if we compare this with the Sonic the Hedgehog movie, and this is something I really wanted to get to settle on, is the Sonic the Hedgehog movie represents the Sonic the Hedgehog movie series, the Mario movie series, the Detective Pikachu, all of that is the Hollywood route of making video game stories cinematic. And Secret Level is doing something entirely different. And I really think that we're going to be able to look back in years past and document what's going on here, which is fascinating. So the other Hollywood versions, Detective Pikachu, Sonic, Mario, are doing the Hollywood version of storytelling where you have to follow the Hollywood roadmap and then put the video game stuff kind of on top of it. So a couple of examples of that are that if you're going to make a video game movie work, you have to have you have to isekai. You have to do Chronicles of Narnia. You have to have this world, which is weird and video gamey, and we don't know what to do with it, has entered the real world. And when we're going to have these worlds clash, and the video game world has to figure out how to make things work with the real world. And that's often a sort of idea we see going on with Sonic and other franchises. Even Mario. Mario goes to the magical world, but he's from our world. There's still that conflict going on and Hollywood has to kind of set up these narratives with very tried and true formulas, right? And stories that map onto what Hollywood needs to have. We have to have a main Hollywood lead like Jim Carrey to guide your blockbuster film from beginning to conclusion.
Mm.
That's the route, and that's why the video game film is having the growing pains that it's having in Hollywood. Secret Level is taking a very risky approach, but it's a risky approach that I think is finally paying off because we now have generations of people who grew up as gamers. And people who grew up as gamers, people who grew up playing Sonic Adventure 2, people who grew up playing Pac-Man, Mega Man, Unreal Tournament, Armored Core, some of the other ones that we may get to some other time or maybe not, we'll see. Warhammer 40K, Dungeons and Dragons. We've played these games since we were children. We know these stories. We're familiar with how they work. And so Secret Level says, I don't need to put I don't need to do the Hollywood thing. I don't have to put a Hollywood actor to be like, what's this video game world? They don't have to do Pixels with Adam Sandler. They can portray the video game worlds on their own terms and sometimes do that in experimental ways, like with Pac-Man. And they can take their own risks, make their own choices, have their own successes and failures. But the key difference is they're doing it on their own terms. Spelunky is not trying to be Hollywood. Spelunky is trying to be about Spelunky and gaming. And Mega Man isn't trying to be something else. It's simply Mega Man. And Pac-Man's doing something very different, but it's not trying to do Hollywood. You know what I mean? I even in its weird thing that it's doing,
it stays in the lane of gaming.
Yeah, and it's very different than what we've seen in Hollywood's interpretation of video games. I actually hope that Secret Level gains even more traction. And I think that's what's going to happen. I think we're going to see that. And I'm looking forward to seeing more people saying, we can do this. We're empowered to do video games on their own terms, and they can succeed and fail on their own terms and not on Hollywood's terms.
Yeah, absolutely agree, Twillis. And what this might be showing us, what studios like Blur, but also the other studios that contribute to this are, I think there might be showing us that we can do stories on their own terms, doing video game tales cinematically, and it might not be that the film length movie adaptation is the main lane, the main mode in which that's explored, which is interesting. You don't have to pick one lane with any of these, obviously, just like you don't have to have just one way to do a video game. So, but I appreciate there's something really interesting and creative, I think, happening where this particular short story, like the Love and Robots kind of, you
Anthology.
know, yeah, like art house, like animatrix. You, you know what I mean? Like there's a storied history of exploring these sort of things and having these kind of what if scenarios and celebrating an IP from different studios, kind of getting at an IP and doing something really fun in a anthology kind of feature like this. It's getting more and more popular. I think more and more people recognize it as it's not just something for the auteur enjoyers, and I think that and the fact that they're doing it off video game uh, IPs says a lot about the strength of where video games are going. To your point, Twillis, but also it's fun that they're elevating this particular format, this sort of art house anthology format for celebrating video games. That's really fun. I didn't see that coming, honestly, and that's great. That's a rising tide that's gonna lift several boats at once.
Thank you very much for checking out the video. Subscribe, like, and stay tuned for more.